Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rangers Journal. My name is Scotty, and I've decided to do a new series for you guys, which is called the Brogues Who's Next. It's a series of interviews with journalists and podcasters regarding a specific candidate that we here at the Rangers Journal think could potentially go in to do a good job. Enjoy.
Every night is the Rangers Journal night.
Hello and welcome back to the Rangers Manager series. I'm Scott Mackay, your host, and I'm delighted to be joined by Chris from the French Football Weekly podcast. Chris, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you, Scott. Yeah, I should caveat the French Football Weekly podcast is currently on hiatus due to work commitments, but yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Aye, not bad at all, not bad at all. So thanks for coming on. Obviously, we're going to talk a wee bit about Will Still today. Just see how he's getting on, what his tactics are, just generally talk about him and get to know him a wee bit. What is it you know about him yourself, Chris?
So, Will Still, so he kind of came onto our radar in French football. Well, as you'd probably be aware, he's the current Lens manager, but prior to that, he was manager at Reims, which quite a small sort of unfancy team. Kind of like to use a comparison, I guess, would be like a mid-table / relegation fighting team. He's a coach who a lot of people in England weren't familiar with until the success he had at Reims, and then sort of stories started coming out, which we might touch on in a minute about how he got his break into football, etc. But yeah, when he sort of broke onto the scene at Reims, he was there for 2 years and transformed a club that were not really known for anything. Without being too harsh on Reims, they were kind of like that archetypal small club that nobody really knew much about. A little bit like what Brest were in the Champions League this year. Like nobody knew anything about them until they got into the Champions League.
I think Rams have won the Champions League previously, though, haven't they? I'm pretty sure they've won a Champions League in their history, because I done a career with them when they football manager, and that was the reason I done it, because I wanted to bring a glory days back to them.
Do you know that if that's the case, I had no idea myself. I'm just looking at their honours now. But yeah, you're right. European Cup, 1955. Well, who knew that? You've educated me there. I may be in my 40s, but I'm not that old. But yeah, he's very much. And as you say, speaking of Football Manager, we could probably touch on that if you wanted to mention that bit about Will as well.
Yeah, so obviously he got his break. I think the papers will tell you, the media will tell you that he got his break via Football Manager anyway. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, in a manner of speaking. So he didn't really have any player career to speak of. So he didn't sort of come through a lot of young coaches do. He actually started out as an assistant manager in the English league, so Preston. I think it's under 16s level. And yeah, he was basically by his own admission an addict of Football Manager and what become on to being Championship manager. And that got him kind of just kind of obsessed with football, basically. He was like, right, how can I get myself into the world of football? And one of the people, or one of the sort of things that have often been criticised for predominantly British players, British coaches, is they don't go abroad. Will was a bit different in that regard, and he actually got a job coaching coaching. Started out as a video analyst in Belgium. Right. And that was where he sort of made his breakthrough, the Belgian First Division club. I think it's Liège. I think it was Liège for memory. And that was kind of the opportunity that he wanted to break into. It's kind of like, well, I want to do coaching, but how can I get into a club? How can I get into the inner workings? And that's where the video analysis came in. But yeah, as regards to the Football Manager side of things, that was his break. There was no real playing career as such. And then once he'd made that move into Belgian football, along with his brother, that was the big break that he needed, and that was the opportunity that he got to get onto the coaching ladder. I think it was St. Truden that he first managed. I think Liège was his first managerial job. I think I'll correct myself there.
Yeah. Would you say it's been a kind of natural progression to him from in his managerial career, obviously going from St. Truden to Stade de Reims to Lens? Lens, obviously a bigger club with better facilities and I would imagine like budget. Would you say he's kind of he's outgrown the roles that he's had and then went on to something better?
Yeah, I think the one I'd focus on, especially there, would be Rouse. Obviously, with my sort of French football background, I didn't know a huge amount about Liège, and I think it's Beerschot was the team he was in Belgium for. But with Rouse, it was almost a bit sort of David Moyes syndrome, where he got to that point where it's like taking the club as far as he can go. What do we do next? And the club kind of outgrew him. And ironically, since he's gone, they would probably have him back in a heartbeat now. So again, much like Moyes with Everton. I think with Ravs, it's kind of one of those situations where because he'd taken them into that position where he was at that point where he was sort of saying to the board, well, look, what do we want to be? I can probably take us further, but if you're not going to bring in the right players, if you're just going to sell our best players, I can't take the club any higher. It's kind of the mutual consent, which nobody ever. Does anyone really know what that ever means? Like mutual consent backing.
I don't.
But it was kind of agreed at the end of the 23-24 season that he was going to move up, and all expectation was the logical progression he was going to make was into a sort of a quote unquote higher project, and Sunderland was mentioned, and that was the one that seemed to be what was going to happen. And then at the same time in France, Lens were moving on Francaise, who is really well regarded, has been at Lens for years. He had the opportunity to move to Nice and all the lovely Ineos money. And that was when Will still sort of had the opportunity to move on to Lens. And I think in hindsight, I think it was probably a good move because Rouse, although Sunderland, obviously they're a big club, I think there would have been far more pressure on him to succeed because like Englishmen coming back, etc. Whereas I think with Lens, he's kind of he's made that small step up from Rouse rather than like a bigger step to come back. So, but yeah, it was definitely a natural progression, and it was very much he went with good grace at Rouse, and I think it was kind of that. He had a very long undefeated streak in that period of time, if I'm not mistaken. And at the end of that, it was always like, well, what else could we do? And like you say, without money, he wasn't going to get the backing he needed to take it on.
Aye, definitely. See, what kind of football does he play? Is he a coach with a clear philosophy, or is he more of a pragmatist?
Yeah, the one word I would use is aggression. And if you've seen much about, he'd fit Scottish football quite well, I think personally. If he ever ended up there, it's an all out press offensive. He does tend to formation wise, there is a little bit of a switch between 3 and 4 backs. He's not rigid. I think the current system he's playing at Lens is a bit of a 3-4-3. But it's very aggressive. And if you look at Lens's disciplinary record this season, that might tell you a thing or two. There's been quite a few red cards and a number of bookings. He's very much a get stuck in type of boss. And I think from memory, I think he speaks 4 different languages. He's not one to hold back in any different language. And you when you watch because the Liga coverage this year is not on mainstream TV, you often get games without commentary. You will hear him on the sidelines barking instructions regularly throughout games. And he very much depends on if you're not running, you're not playing. It's very much that kind of coach. As far as attacking wise goes, he tends to like. He quite likes those sort of nippy players that will create space and make something happen for themselves, like the creative types, as far as an offense goes. But defensively, he's all about strong in the tackle, closing people down, good in the air, rigid backbone. So, yeah, there is a philosophy, but it's definitely based on aggression and making sure that the opposition don't have time to breathe.
What about his style of football? I know he says he's a pressing manager.
Yeah.
Does his teams play good football in AI?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a lot of teams play this way now, but a lot of it is counter attacking, soaking up and hitting teams with speed. I think the thing with Lens is he hasn't got. When he was at Reims, he had a player by the name of Teddy Tuma, who people may know from Belgium as well. He's the Maltese captain, and he Teddy's kind of one of those creative number 10s, if you will. Would sit in that position just in between the two strikers, and will creatively sort of push the team forwards. When he's been at Lens, he hasn't really had that type of player. There's a few youngsters. I think Lobo Lascari is probably the closest you'll get to it this season, but he hasn't had that fulcrum number 10. And I think they've suffered with that. And also with Lens, they've got a big striker in Florian Satoka, who's very much your classic number 9. He's a big aggressive forward, but there isn't a lot of finesse there. If you know what I mean? He's not going to run in from the left and swell one into the far corner. That's not his type of player.
Yeah.
So he definitely has changed a bit this season, and it'd be interesting to see if he does stay at Lens, which I think he probably will. Whether in the summer they do look to get some more creativity in that sort of play, because that was where, when he was at his best with Rams, it was all going through Tuma, and he had a good winger in Junior Itu as well, which I think he's still at Rams. Creative winger, flair, that type of player. So it's kind of his style is, we'll be solid at the back, we'll hit teams on the counter, but we'll use pace to hurt the opposition. That's how I think. That's how I see it anyway.
How do you see his teams coming up against what's called a low block in Scotland? Rangers play against 11 men behind the ball nearly every week.
Yeah. I wouldn't say.
Okay.
I think the one thing I would say is he's quite good at excuse me, he's quite good at in-game tactics.
Right.
So he does tend to switch things up against certain opposition. He's not one of your standard managers who just has one way of playing and that's it. He's quite creative, and he's quite good at in-game substitutions as well. So he's a sort of manager that probably like Mourinho is probably a good example to use. Excuse me. Where if things are not working after 15, 20 minutes, he's not afraid to change it, whether either in-game tactics or physically changing players. What I would say is with the low block is, again, you get a lot of that in French football, but probably not against. I think Lens were probably more likely to play it than they would be to defend against it, if you see what I mean. He tends to be a player that his philosophy is, we'll go at the opposition and see what they've got. When you come up against a low block in France, it's quite a physical league, and you do get hence why there's been a lot of red and yellow cards where if a team kicks his team, he's more likely to be the manager to say, we'll go and kick them back, rather than adapt to their style. So it's like his philosophy is, we'll play our way, and if that doesn't work, we'll adjust our tactics to suit how we play, not drop ourselves to the level of oppositions. So I think, again, it comes down to if he's got the creativity to break it down, he will. If not, he'll mix fire with fire and just go up against the opposition and, sort of if they're going to sit deep, well, it's like, right, well, we'll swing crosses in and see what you've got then.
See, in terms of management style, would you say he's a motivator, a disciplinarian, a bit of both?
Both. Yeah, both of those. Yeah, he's definitely a motivator. I touched on it before, that he's a very vocal coach. I think from memory, I think he's got both of his brothers at Lens alongside him now. Right. And you will often see it's kind of like that rotational thing. One will come to the touchline, one will go back in, another one will come. It's kind of like that. But yeah, he's not shy of a touchline ban. So he's got that personality. He's got that sort of fire in his belly. But at the same time, he is a thoughtful coach. Like he's not one of those who just rants and raves for the sake of it. He's very much one of those that will encourage his players and push his players forward. And I think you might know he's had some personal traumas this season, but his partner's been very unwell. And I think he's not been his sort of. It's almost like, because he wasn't on the touchline for a number of weeks where he was over in this country looking after his partner, and since he's come back, it's almost like he's come back with a new fire and new aggression. And I think that he's one of those people that if things are going against him, he uses that to push his teams on, if you see what I mean, to motivate them. So yeah, I think in terms of if he was to ever manage in, either England or Scotland, I don't think there'd be any issue with motivation. And as for discipline side of things, yeah, he doesn't mind his players going into challenges, but he's very happy to bollock a few players if they're stepping out of line as well. And he runs quite a tight ship. You'll see quite a lot of viral videos of him in training. He's quite happy to, put players in their place, but at the same time do it with a smile. So there's almost like a Sunday league element of management. Right. It's like you give me what I ask, and you'll have no problems. you don't do what I ask, and you won't play. It's as simple as that.
Has there ever been any well-known fallouts within the French media of player and manager when any of his clubs that come to
Not
mind?
that I'm aware of. He tends to fall out with the media a bit. That is something that does happen. Again, it's because he's kind of one of those managers that if you, again, I don't want to use the Mourinho comparison too much, but if a journalist asks him a question he doesn't want to answer, he will make that very clear. And if he thinks the question is stupid, he will make that very clear. And I think those people who might have seen him on Sky, I think was it Monday he was on Sky?
He was on Monday, with Jamie Carragher.
Yeah. So I must confess, I didn't actually watch that. I only saw the game because, frankly, I can't deal with Jamie Carragher for an hour. Whilst he's a very sort of thoughtful individual, he's also quite I think he's quite an introvert to a degree.
Right.
But at the same time, as I say, he's one of those that if somebody asks you a question that he doesn't really want to answer, he doesn't hide that very well. He's not one to hold back on criticism of bad questioning and such like. So there's a spiky element to his character, I think.
Quite like the sound of him so far, to be honest. It fit in well in Glasgow.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah.
In terms of his player development, a big thing with Rangers now with the takeover and stuff that's coming in is buying players at a low fee, selling them for more money. Basically, it's how Scottish football, Rangers and Celtic need to run.
Yeah.
Do you think he would be good at that? Is he showing any kind of characteristics or any player sales for previous clubs that stick out to you?
Yeah, I do think that would probably be in his MO. I mean, again, with Raz, there wasn't really. I'm trying to think of any sort of big name players that moved on from Raz. Not so much. I mean, more with Lons. I mean, they sold Brice Samba, their goalkeeper, and moved on to Rennes. I think that was kind of a deal that was kind of going to happen anyway. So I don't think you could put that down to him too much. Yeah. But what I really do like about him is that he invests in the squad that he's got, and I think he makes players better. And in particular, like younger players, I mentioned before, like Labola Scari has come through under his leadership this season. Tom Pouli, who's another young French fullback, has got his opportunity to play this season as well. Andy Diouf, who's a player that I think a little inconsistent, but he's one of those that if he hits a good vein of form, he'll be another sort of young player that will come out of France and move on somewhere. So I do think he's got that ability to develop players. But we haven't really seen him work with. I'm quite intrigued to see how he would get on with some big name players, which is what made me wonder about the Sunderland move and whether he actually looked at that and went, "Do you know what? I'd rather build my own managerial career rather than step into a higher profile job with higher profile players." And if you look at the current Lens squad, if you didn't know them, I don't think many people would be able to name you more than two players, if that. It's a very ragtag group, if you will. So it'd be interesting to see what sort of players they go for in the summer. But yeah, he's used to managing clubs that don't have big budgets, and he's used to sort of getting the best out of better players. The loan market as well, he's quite keen on. I think Loz have got 3 loanees at the moment. Satriano, I think, is from Inter Milan, and Balanzola, who's from Fiorentina. And there's another lad. I'm sure they've got a lad from Manchester City at the moment whose name escapes me. But yeah, they've got a few loanees, so he's pretty good at the market in terms of bringing players in. So working on a budget, I don't think would phase him if that's the way it was going to be.
Is he good at giving any youth players a chance?
Yeah, that's something I do like. So, like I say, mentioned a couple of names there with the Lens team, but yeah, he's not one of these managers that looks at a player and thinks, "Oh, well, you're not a name, so I'm not going to play you." If somebody is performing well in training, I think Labola Scari is a really good example of that because he wasn't really in and around the Lens first team squad this season. He had a good pre-season, and as a result, he got promoted into the senior squad. So I do think he's a manager that is quite happy to give those young players a chance. But at the same time, again, if you look at the Lens squad, there's a lot of senior pros in that as well. I mentioned Sotoka. Then Palace Mendy, who people might remember from Leicester's there. Wesley Said, who's not a young player. Malang Sarr is another one. So he's quite happy to play like the senior pros, but
Right, okay.
no problem with throwing in youth. If they're good enough, he'll play them.
How does his teams look from set pieces? It's a big thing with Rangers this season, as when Philippe Clement was in charge. The set pieces were woeful, constantly conceding corners and free kicks, conceding goals from corners and free kicks, and not scoring from them.
Yeah.
As his teams, does he work with a set piece coach, for example? Is his teams known for being effective?
Yeah, I wouldn't say known for it, but he's very going back to the Championship manager that we discussed earlier on, or going back to that side of things. He's very much he likes the numbers, he likes the analytics. So
Right.
he is very much a, if we can get a what's the word? If we can get an advantage, if we can get ahead of a club, like, if we can find something tactical that we can pull off, he will do it. And set plays is definitely something that Lons have worked on this season. You can see that they weren't the best at it last year. Defensively, being honest, they have conceded a few from set pieces. I don't have the stats in front of me, so I couldn't.
Yeah.
I tend to be one of those that goes in my eyes more than the stats man. But yeah, I would say there is probably an element, because going back to that thing I said about not having the flair players, there is a bit of a reliance on being good from corners and set plays. So offensively, I'd say yes. Defensively, I'd need to look at the numbers. Probably some work to do there, I'd say.
So, onto Rangers then. The pressure cooker that is Glasgow, the Goldfish Bowl as it's known as here.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's a challenge that he would relish? He would worry in, or?
Yeah, I think it's one to keep an eye on this summer, because as I'm not privy to his private life, and nobody is other than him, and it'd be interesting to see, like, if his partner does have continued care. It's one of those situations where if a move back to the UK would benefit that, I think he would be available. I don't think he's the sort of manager that would just walk out on loans without a really good project. And ironically, like a club like Rangers, I think probably would appeal to him, based around the fact of obviously the history of the club, the size of the club, the opportunity to potentially play in Europe. Yeah, I think it would interest him, but I think it would have to be on the right terms. And as I say, from his personal perspective, that would have to work. And of course, the dominoes to fall, like with Lons finding a suitable replacement. The one thing I would say is that I would probably argue Lons have slightly underperformed this season. Whilst their form's picked up a little bit in recent weeks, you can't overlook what has happened with the personal side of things. That's probably going to have had an effect on the way the club are performing, which I think is completely fair enough. Like it's going to happen, but it does make me wonder, like, if there was an opportunity for both parties to say, "Look, you want to go here, we want to go in a different direction." Maybe there'd be a handshake there. I think Logs would regret that if they did. I've just checked the table; they're actually in eighth, but I think at the start of the season they probably would have been where, for example, like Nice are in fifth on 51 points. That's a clear 6 points ahead of where Lens are. I think Lens are a club that want to be in European football. So there might be an element of, parting ways on mutual terms. But as far as clubs he would look at as an interest, I mean, Rangers is a step up from Sunderland, let's be honest. So I think he'd be interested if that opportunity came up.
Aye, fair enough. Just last question, Chris. See, if his team's getting into a bit of a rut or something's not working tactically on the pitch, is he good at, like, his in-game management, at changing something? Is he scared to change a system or take a player off, or scared of making a decision, basically?
Yeah, that's the one thing I'd say not a problem with, as I think I mentioned it briefly before. But yeah, in-game changes, making substitutions doesn't bother him at all. If you look at because of the disciplinary record as well this season and the amount of reds, I should look it up and see how many it's been. But because of that circumstance, he's had to make in-game changes quite a lot this season.
Yeah.
I'm just looking through now. There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in the last 10 to 12 where he's been down to 10 men. So yeah, he is used to in-game changes and moving things around. But as you said before, like from a tactical perspective as well, I think the trouble with putting that into like a Rangers standpoint is, I guess obviously you've got the big one with Celtic every year. I don't know how many other clubs are particularly on the level that would change it, making game changes, if you know what I mean, like how much he would actually have to be tested. I know Aberdeen have steadied the ship a bit now, and Hibs have steadied the ship a bit, but I don't know how many of their coaches would outcoach Will Still, if that makes sense. But then I wouldn't have said they'd have outcoached Philippe Clement, so goes to show things could change.
No, definitely. Philippe Clement was I don't really know. I had a Monaco fan on because I'd done like a mini series on his channel about him. Like, I had a Genk fan, I had a Club Bruges fan, then I had a Monaco fan on. And the Monaco fan wasn't too critical, but all these negative points, I could see well exactly why they thought what they did.
Yeah,
it was his press conferences here. Like, he would come out and say after we get beat, say 2-1 at Aberdeen, that it was the best performance of the season.
Yeah,
that doesn't wash at Rangers. It just doesn't.
People see through that, and I think that's where I could see Will Still being quite a good fit. The only thing I would say is, who was the coach you had who was at very, very disliked? Oh, what was his name? The English coach,
Michael Beale.
That's the Badger. He was a bit spicy, wasn't he, with the press? And I would say, like, I think Will Still's a very different character, but has similar kind of traits in terms of how he would deal with the media and how he would deal with criticism. I don't think Will would be the sort of manager that would just sit there and take criticism. I think he'd be the sort of manager that would fire back. And again, that can go one way or the other. Like, it can inspire, and when your manager's doing well, that works brilliantly. But if things start going against him, I'd quite like to see the tactical battle between him and Rodgers, for example. I think that'd be quite an interesting watch. So yeah, on paper, it does have a good fit. It's all about circumstances, I think, for him.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Chris, thanks for coming on, mate. That was very informative.
You're very welcome. No worries at all.
Do you want to tell folk where they can find you?
Yeah, so like I say, we're on a hiatus at the moment. Myself and Jeremy and Phil, who run French Football Weekly, we've all got quite demanding careers, so the podcast kind of took a bit of a dip in the new year. We just couldn't align our schedules, so I think the plan is now we'll see out the season. We'll do a bit of a recce and hopefully come back next year. But yeah, French Football Weekly is where to find us, and obviously you can still reach out and find us individually. I'm still flogging myself on X, so if people want to reach out, they can do that.
No, mate, that's brilliant. Honestly, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, Scott. Good to meet you.
Right, you too, mate. Right, cheers, guys.